Inside of Holyrood Abbey in Edinburgh lies a burial vault, and this was once the royal vault. Today it is sealed by a large door, but it was where many kings of Scotland were interred following their deaths. Today Holyrood Abbey is a shell of its former self, and it was the place where kings and queens would come to worship. But this vault was broken into a number of times over the centuries. Inside of the vault was the remains of the second husband of Mary, Queen of Scots, the infamous Lord Darnley, a man who was obsessed with power, and he wished greatly for his wife to make him the King of Scotland and to rule alongside her. But Mary never granted Darnley this, and Henry Stuart, as he was known, became furious. He died under rather bizarre circumstances, but the location of his remains are a mystery, and it's believed that they were stolen from that very burial vault inside of Holyrood Abbey. But what is the story of opening the coffin of Mary, Queen of Scots' second husband? Darnley himself was the eldest surviving son of Matthew Stuart, the 4th Earl of Lennox, and he descended from Tudor royalty. His grandmother was Lady Margaret Tudor, the daughter of King Henry VII of England, and the widow of James IV, the King of Scotland. He was born in Leeds in Yorkshire in around 1545, and his upbringing was rather different. After the Wars of the Rough Wooing, Matthew Stuart sided with the English king, Henry VIII, and because of this the family estates were forfeited, and his father went to England to live in exile for 22 years. Henry knew he was from a high-profile family, and as a boy he received a good education, and he was said to have been a strong and skilled young man. He was close to the line of succession to the crown of England after Queen Elizabeth, but he was not as close to it as Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, Queen of Scots at the time, had been living in France and returned to Scotland following the death of her first husband, the French King Francis II. Darnley's mother had for some time tried to facilitate a marriage and an agreement between her son and Mary, who was 4 years older than him. Following Francis's death, Darnley was sent to France to meet the widowed Queen of Scotland, and during their first meeting, nothing really occurred. When Darnley returned to Scotland to travel with his father, he and Mary grew closer. At first he was part of a large group of men who wished to try and take the Queen's hand in marriage. However, in the April of 1565, after being part of Mary's court for a short while, he became very sick. At Stirling Castle, he contracted measles, and Mary the Queen nursed him back to health, and when he recovered, the Queen had fallen head over heels in love with him. He was a tall and attractive man, and the marriage took place on the 29th of July, 1565, in the chapel of the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. The match caused outrage between Mary and her advisers, including the influential John Knox, the religious reformer, and also James Stuart, the 1st Earl of Moray, Mary's half-brother. Queen Elizabeth of England also was furious with the marriage and ordered him and his father to return to England. They disobeyed this, and it's bizarre why Elizabeth was furious, as she even gave Darnley permission to travel to Scotland initially. Mary wished to marry Darnley quickly, and rushing this through, she didn't receive special permission to marry from the Pope, which was required, due to the fact they were related. Their marriage initially was happy, but shortly after Mary became pregnant in the autumn of 1565, and Darnley quickly became very annoyed with the fact he had been given the title of King Consort. This angered him greatly, as he wished not to just be a consort with no real legal power. He wished to be the King of the Scots outright, and with all the authority that a king should possess. He was not willing to sit in the shadows and act merely as an adviser. He believed, as he had royal blood, he should wield and possess more power than his wife, and because of this he grew incredibly dissenting. Mary soon learned that her new husband was arrogant and unreliable and very unpopular within her nobles and advisers. He also was known for being rather violent and physical, including hitting the Queen, which was made worse when he drank alcohol. Mary continued to refuse to appoint Darnley the successor to her if she died childless, and Darnley was furious. This rage was encapsulated by the murder of David Rizzio, the Queen's private secretary. On the 9th of March 1566, Darnley, along with a number of his friends and nobles, whilst the Queen was 6 months pregnant, brutally murdered her closest adviser. Some accused Mary of having an affair with the flamboyant David Rizzio, and rumours were around court that Rizzio was the child of the heir to the throne. He was stabbed 56 times, and he left to die all whilst the Queen was screaming. It was clear that Darnley was behind the murder, and Mary could no longer trust her husband, and he was hated even more. When their son, the future James VI of Scotland and James I of England, the successor to the throne, was in place, Darnley's son, the royal couple continued to have marriage issues. Darnley began to drink heavier and alienated people, and was still obsessed with the fact he believed he should be the king outright. However, within a year of the murder of David Rizzio, Lord Darnley himself would find himself dead in bizarre and incredible circumstances. At the start of 1567, Darnley was taken ill in Glasgow from suspected syphilis, which he picked up possibly from visiting prostitutes. Mary went to see him, and they returned to Edinburgh, and Darnley was taken to Provost House and was attached to a church called Kirk O'Field, just inside the walls of the city. The house was owned by Robert Balfour, whose brother was a counsellor of the Queen's. He was taken there to recover, and at the time, because no one knew what caused his illness, he was left there to recover to ensure he did not come into contact with the baby son, the future king. On the 9th of February, Mary visited her husband in the evening, and then returned to the palace of Holyrood House. However, what happened next was unbelievable. In the early hours of the 10th of February, the house exploded and was destroyed whilst the Queen was at Holyrood celebrating a wedding. The house was decimated, and the partially clothed body of Lord Darnley and his servant were found nearby in an orchard. It was said that the explosion was a force that destroyed the whole lodgings, and there is nothing left which is not ruined. However, their bodies didn't tell a story that they died in the explosion. The two bodies showed signs of strangulation, and that they were, in fact, unharmed by the explosion. Because of this, it was clear that Darnley was murdered before the explosion occurred. Statements obtained the next day confirmed strange behaviour near the lodgings. One witness stated how she was looking out of her window and heard 13 men pass nearby, and then there was a huge explosion, and she accused these men of being traitors and evil. Another woman who lived opposite said how she was in bed when she heard the explosion, and when she ran to the door she saw 11 men. She grabbed one to ask what happened, and no answer was given. A later memoir would state how Darnley was taken out of the house shortly before the explosion, and was strangled to death in the stable, with a serviette in his mouth. He was then left under a tree. Rewards were offered for information, but suspicion fell upon the Queen herself. Other accounts of Darnley's murder offered slightly different stories. One historian states how Darnley had been strangled before the explosion, and it's likely that he saw the commotion outside with the conspirators, and along with his servant fled the house, and they were found in the garden. It's possible they escaped using a rope from the first floor window, as this was also found nearby, and when they were intercepted they were murdered with the explosion, an attempt to cover up the murder. However, the men got out of the house, which confirmed they had died. Mary observed 40 days of mourning for her husband. However, suspicion began to arise. But Mary would then be imprisoned by the man who she would then marry next, her third husband, James Hepburn. But following his death, Lord Darnley was buried inside of the royal vault in Holyrood Abbey in 1567. He was laid to rest alongside the bodies of a number of kings, including King David II and King James II, as well as King James V, the father of his wife, Mary, Queen of Scots. However, he would not be laid to rest for eternity. In 1668, an angry mob stormed into Holyrood Abbey, and they then broke into the royal vault and caused a significant amount of damage, and they stole many of the bones. A further incursion into the burial vault took place into the 18th century, as another angry mob broke into it. But because of this, the remains of Lord Darnley and his corpse may have been stolen or tampered with, but it's known for certain that his skull was taken and was removed from the burial vault. The skull of Lord Darnley went missing for many years, and in 1928 a research paper was produced about the possible location of it, and in this it was claimed that the skull was held inside the Royal College of Surgeons Museum in Edinburgh. But then in 2016 a request was made to try and identify the skull in the university's collection, which could have been the stolen skull of Henry Stuart, the second husband of Mary, Queen of Scots. The Royal College of Surgeons skull, as well as the one inside of the university, were analysed and compared, and it was confirmed that the university skull could not be the one. However, the one inside of the Royal College of Surgeons could possibly be. From this, a historian facial reconstruction was produced, and it showed that the skull belonged to a man who held an incredible likeness and similarity to the portraits of Lord Darnley, and this brought an end to the mystery as to where Darnley's skull was. It's been considered that the skull of Darnley could at one point in the future been returned to the royal burial vault, or parts of it. It had been destroyed in part due to the Blitz, so it had to be reconstructed, but Lord Darnley was a man who was hated inside of the Scottish court by many. He was a man obsessed with power, and he treated his wife Mary, Queen of Scots, poorly towards the end of his life. Thank you so much for watching and support. Please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.